Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Two Rivers Tuesday. How are you, John? Why are you looking at me like that?
I just think it's funny how, what people don't know is that the recording starts, but right before the recording happens, we're talking about some usually nonsense.
Yes.
And then it's just and then you just go, well, hello. And I'm like, whoa. It's abrupt.
But do you know about my little tick?
No.
Jesse told me about this. Apparently, the way I start every podcast, I make a noise that sounds like this right before, and that's how he knows to start capturing the audio or where the audio starts.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just helps me. I don't know why, to just kick it off.
Do you have family members who suck their teeth after meals and make that noise?
Suck their teeth. I've never heard it called that. Yes, I do. And it's distinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think you do also.
I do.
You seem to know this from experience.
I do. You're not saying I'm a teeth sucker, are you?
I cannot handle this expression.
Oh, yeah, it's not a good one.
Teeth sucker. I don't think I've ever noticed you doing that.
Okay, good. Someone needs to tell me.
Yes, the same. All the people out there, if you ever see me doing it, call me out.
Yeah, speaking of that, I was looking at the sermon video from Sunday, and I was like, what is going on with my collar? And so I had a vest on, just a zip-up vest, and it was pinning down the collar to my shirt. Uh-huh. And so it just looked super weird.
I didn't notice.
And the video was from the first service, and that's where my wife and daughters were, and I just felt like they failed me in that.
They did.
Now I will say that after first service, I was out in the lobby, and I was talking to people, and I was by the check-in table, and that's where my wife was working, and in kids ministry, and she was like, "Hey, here, let me fix your collar." So she fixed it.
Okay.
She came in clutch for me for second service, but I just was thinking someone should tell me these things,
yes.
Before I get up.
Yeah.
We should all have that kind of relationship with one another. If your fly's down, if your collar's pinned, if there's something in your teeth, if you're making a weird noise, we just need to be able to love one another well.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Do you feel like after having 3 girls and a wife, being the only male in your household, do you have thick skin? Can they hurt your feelings at all, or they can just say whatever and you're just I'm used to it?
I think I'm probably more used to it than I was at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I think I probably still sometimes it still stings.
Yes.
Or I'm you guys got to help me with these things. But then there are other things that kind of just annoy me. I don't care. I'm sort of getting that. I'm getting to that age where I'm I care less.
Yes.
And so some of them happen to be things if I have wispy eyebrow hairs.
You don't care anymore.
I don't really care about that, but it drives Katie crazy. Uh-huh. This is the kind of stuff, by the way, that we could talk about for hours on this podcast, but I know is probably obnoxious to some people.
Yes.
So we should probably move on.
We have banter lovers and banter haters.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yes.
It's we're trying to, yeah.
All right, so you're ready to transition to the sermon?
We should. Yes.
All right, tell us what we kicked off on Sunday.
Well, we kicked off a new series. We're kind of back into the Sermon on the Mount, but just to kind of we're sort of dropping back in. We started the Sermon on the Mount back in August, and so we're dropping back in Matthew 6 with the Lord's Prayer. I think that's very appropriate for this season of the year, this new year. And so we're calling this series of messages Seek First, because that's what Jesus said for us to do. Seek first the kingdom. And so we're wanting to seek him first, especially here at the first of the year. And one of the things that I said on Sunday was prayer is a big part of that seeking first. Mm-hmm. And I want that to be a first response, not a last resort.
Yes. Yeah. And you talked about how, like you just said, prayer, we want to be our first response and not a last resort. What do you think are some of the things we typically go to as a first response instead of prayer?
Oh my gosh. Lots of things.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on the situation we're in. I think sometimes we go straight to maybe worry and control.
Yes.
Those are some of the intangible things. We might go to other people. which is not a bad thing.
Right.
You know, there's wisdom in many counselors when something happens, but sometimes we may need to go to the Lord first. And those are a few. What did you have in your mind?
Yeah, three things come to mind. The first one is other people, like I'm a verbal processor, so a lot of times I'm just like, I need to talk to somebody about this, and totally forget that I have someone to talk to about this, which is Jesus all the time. So just like, instead of taking all my verbal processing needs to the people closest to me, like thinking, oh, I can verbally process this with Jesus. So that's one thing that comes to mind. Another thing that comes to mind is sometimes instead of going to prayer, I think when it's like something difficult or heavy or sad or stressful, I just want to like not think about that or feel that anymore. So I go to like distraction instead of to prayer. So my first response is like, I would like to numb this and not think about this right now. So I'm going to like scroll on Pinterest instead of responding in prayer. And then another one I think through is like, the way I'm wired is very much like trying to like analyze and prepare in my mind. And so my first response to something is probably to start analyzing and seeing how I can prepare and seeing how I can like strategize this instead of prayer as a first response.
Yeah, or just like my first response is to fix.
Yes.
Or attack.
Yes.
The person or the problem, or create a solution. And not all those things are not all bad. Maybe the attack the problem, that's great. But the first response should probably be going to the Lord.
Yes.
Lord, would you inform my thoughts right now? I may not be thinking about this correctly at all. I need your wisdom in this as I begin to process how I'm going to handle this.
Yes. Yeah. How do you think we like create that habit? Like if someone's hearing this or I'm hearing this and I'm like, yeah, I want prayer to be my first response, but a lot of times it's not. How can I what can I do that can help me go to that as a first response more often?
That's a really good question. So the first thing that comes to my mind, just hitting me cold, is practice.
Yes.
And I know that like that may not be the most fun answer, but practice. We just have to practice relating to God in this native language that He's given us. You know, we need to pray and have a kind of an ongoing posture of prayer with Him when things are not hitting the fan. You know, when we're not needing to respond to, you know, a crisis. You know, this is why I shared that quote on Sunday from a first responder that just said, when crisis hits, we don't usually rise to the level of our aspirations. We fall to the level of our preparation.
Yes.
I think the hope is that we prepare and practice so much that there is no fall to the level of our preparation. We're ready.
Yes.
You know, but I think there's wisdom in that quote, because we would like to think that whenever a situation, you know, arises, we'll be up to the task and ready for the challenge. And I just think that a lot of times those things come out of nowhere and it can catch us flat-footed.
Yes.
And if we've not been practicing praying with the Lord, then it's probably not going to be our first response.
Yes.
You know, it's going to be react, respond, fight back, defend. These are some of the things that I think I go to immediately when there's a heightened situation that happens. Fear, you know, and so we have to practice. We have to just continually pray and look for opportunities to do that when we get up in the morning, when we're in the car, just learning how to do that when we're not in a crisis mode.
Yes, yeah. It reminds me of this past summer when we did the book club in John Mark Comer's book, Practicing the Way. One of the things we talked through was the concept of abiding, and he kind of fleshed that out further and gave this picture of like making your home in God and like making God a habit. And I just think every time I'm in a season where I'm putting effort into abiding in prayer and like making God my home and like making that a habit, the like grace comes in that He uses like my efforts and that practice that you're speaking of, and then like just multiplies that and brings fruit to that by like just creating in me a more sensitive heart that is like more prone and more sensitive to responding to prayer as my first response.
Yes.
So I just think that's kind of where the like grace factor comes in, is like we want that to be our first response. So what we can do is put effort into practicing it,
Yeah.
and then the grace comes in when in that moment, by God's grace, it is what we first respond to.
Yes.
Jake was just telling me recently that like we both are like in this season of the year where we're like trying to make God a habit and like trying to be more diligent and like get on the wall and all these things that you're helping like shepherd us toward. And he said he just like woke up in the middle of the night and like prayer came to mind, and the Lord just like dropped something like in his heart, and his response was to pray. And it's just like that kind of thing can happen often and regularly and more, and we can like hunger for it. But all of that happens when we are putting in our effort to get on the wall.
Yes.
Okay, so explain, if somebody's like, what is the wall? Give us a little context. This is something I think we've been saying a lot, and something we're going to keep saying.
Yes.
So let's just remind everyone, what do we mean when we say get on the wall?
When we say get on the wall, we're referring to Isaiah chapter 62, and that is where God says, I put watchmen on the wall. And he's talking about praying, and he wants people to be watching the horizon and praying and giving God no rest, continuing to pray to him about the things that he's putting on their hearts, the things that he's showing them, the things that are, in front of them. And ultimately there was a beautiful expression that it's like, give him no rest until, and I don't remember it, but it's something like until God is glorified in Jerusalem, which we talked about being kind of the city of God, which in the Bible is really a metaphor for the people of God. Until he's glorified in the transformation of his people, give him no rest.
Yeah.
So keep praying. Get on the wall and watch like you were guarding a city. You were on a tower, and your job was to look not only for what may be coming from as far as an enemy attack, but what also may be coming as far as an opportunity.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's so good. And on Sunday, you talked about how like when we're on the wall, we see those attacks coming and we see those opportunities coming. Those are coming whether we're on the wall or not.
Right.
And so the fruit of being on the wall is that we see it from far off and can be prepared and can respond and can, when in the example of when it's an enemy, we can protect people. We can like know the truth. We can combat that attack. And then the example of when it's an opportunity, we can actually respond to that opportunity.
Step
and not
right
be
into that.
caught flat-footed.
Yes.
So let's kind of like bring this further down. What are some examples of like types of attacks we might see from far off, or types of opportunities we might see from far off?
Well, I was sharing with you an example before we hit record, and this is just a real relevant one that's on the top of my mind. I just sensed very strongly that I needed to get to the school on Sunday morning and pray. I needed to be there early and to spend more time praying than I normally do. And so I did, and I got to the school, and as soon as I tried to start praying and walking around the halls, I was just having a hard time. I couldn't do it. I was distracted. It was noisy. I didn't know where to go. Where am I going to find a place? It's just like all these things that were just keeping me from prayer, and my precious time to pray was ticking down. And it was like, because I've been in this heightened season of like being on the wall and kind of like being in this, I don't know, just season of awareness of what God is doing and what's going on spiritually around us, I realized pretty quickly, thankfully, that like, wait a second, this is just the enemy of our souls. And he is not happy about what we're going to talk about this morning, and about the ground that God wants to take in our lives. And so I eventually had to walk outside where I could just pray out loud and look probably like a raving fool, and was just praying with the authority that we sang about on Sunday, the authority that we have in Jesus' name against our enemy. And that was because I sensed that the wolf was on the prowl. The lion that Peter talks about in 1 Peter was on the prowl and headed for our church family.
Yeah. And
because I was on the wall, I was able to pray into that. And as I'm saying this story, I don't want that to sound like I'm some kind of like prayer hero or something, because there have been plenty of other times where I was so not in that season of awareness, and I hadn't been practicing, I hadn't been preparing, And so the attack just comes and smacks you across the face and creates havoc and chaos, and you're just like, whoa, what happened?
Wasn't
you
ready.
know, I wasn't ready.
Yeah, those are great examples. I think something that comes to my mind is when people have been on the wall for me or for my family or for like our church staff, and they come to me and kind of give me that warning or that like, look at this opportunity. Like I can think of people who have come to me and they've been like, when I was praying, like I sensed like this is opportunity God has for you. So like be sensitive to that and lean into that. And then I in turn have that heightened awareness to like look for that opportunity as well. And then I've also had seasons where somebody has like been on the wall for me and they've come to me with like a warning of like, hey, like watch out. Like I sensed that I needed to like pray over your marriage. So like watch out. And so then I'm like so thankful for that, and I can have this heightened awareness of like praying into that too, but also like being like vigilant to see how the enemy might be coming to attack my marriage.
That's right.
So I think the like way this ties into even the like family piece is like we need one another to be on the wall for each other, because you can probably see opportunities that I can't see for me and like threats that I can't see for me, and we need to be like doing that for one another. So I just encourage you right now, like pause this podcast or right after this podcast, like get on the wall for someone you love and like ask the Lord to show you what are some like unique opportunities coming their way, what are some like threats coming their way, and listen to what he might want to share with you and be obedient to share that with them and see what the Lord does with that. All right, so let's talk about what Jesus said when he taught us to pray. So let's jump into that kind of first line of the Lord's Prayer that goes like, and Jesus says, when you pray, pray like this, our Father in heaven. And so why is it important, or why is it a helpful pattern to begin with Father?
Yeah. Well, I think it reminds us that we are not throwing up like requests or like mailing off a letter to Santa, you know, like I'm just thinking that just came to my mind, you know, like where you like to the North Pole, wherever that is, and to Santa, if you even exist, like, and this is my list, right? Like, like God is not some distant cosmic creator being, which we talked about that on Sunday in another context. And he wants us to know that no, he is a relational father. And so we need to relate to him that way. We have access to him like children have access to the king. And I think there's a real reason. Jesus had fellowship with the Father that he so enjoyed, and here we're being invited into it.
Yeah. And I think there is something really powerful about using this pattern and just starting with Father, because if I jump into prayer and start immediately asking for stuff, or, you know, you could name it. There's just like so many different forms that prayer will take on if I kind of start further down the road than I should, if that makes sense. But it really helps me to begin all of my prayers thinking about like who I'm praying to and that he is my Father. And I think that just starting with the like combating of that original lie that the serpent was trying to like convince Eve of is like that whisper of like, he is distant, he doesn't know you, he doesn't really care, is he listening, does he hear you, does it matter, like all of those lies that we like wake up almost like defaulting to believe when we begin our prayers with Father and like remembering that we have a Father and like what his character is. I think that like just sets the right trajectory for like where my prayer will continue in and like the posture that I have.
That's why we talked about the doctrine or the blessing of adoption.
Yes.
God loves me. That's God the Father loves me. He loves you, and he chose to adopt you. He chose you into his family.
Yes. Yeah. That reminds me of that Packer quote. Do you want to read it for us?
Yes. There's a great quote in J.I. Packer's classic, Knowing God. And he says, if you want to judge how well a person understands Christianity, find out how much he makes of the thought of being God's child and having God as his Father. If this is not the thought that prompts and controls his worship and prayers and his whole outlook on life, it means that he does not understand Christianity very well at all. For everything that Christ taught, everything that makes the New Testament new and better than the Old, everything that is distinctively Christian is summed up in the knowledge of the fatherhood of God. I just think that's so good.
That's really powerful. This line where he talks about like viewing God as Father changes our whole outlook on life reminds me of what you said about how like we so often live as if we don't have a father.
Yes.
But this reality of being adopted and having a father changes everything, changes our whole outlook on life. But so often we live as if we don't have a father. So what are some of those ways that we start to live outside of this reality as if we don't have a good father?
Yeah, well, let me just say this. Some of us who are listening, we're real used to living like we don't have a father because that's been such a part of our earthly life.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't have a father, or maybe you had a father that was very distant and cold, a father that was very distracted, a father that was unfaithful. I mean, because of the wounds and the baggage of our earthly fathers, we have learned how to live without a father.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we've grown scar tissue over those wounds. We've learned how to protect those places, to not need it, right? And so like, accidentally, we've shielded ourselves from this beautiful blessing of knowing God as our Heavenly Father. And so I think that it's worth just acknowledging that. And I didn't do that on Sunday, but there's a lot of us that feel that way.
Yeah. But I think even like there are those wounds, but even in those wounds, like deep down in all of us, there's something that like longs for a father,
Yes,
right? Like that is
yes.
something that is like wired into us to know there is a good father out there, and we like can spot all the like bad fathers because there's something hardwired in us that knows what the good father is actually like.
And even if you did not have a father or did not have a loving relationship with your earthly father, it doesn't mean like you can't have that relationship with God the Father.
Yes.
In fact, God the Father wants to provide for you what you didn't experience, even better than you could have experienced in your earthly father. So I don't even remember your original question, but I felt like
what
that
are
was
some
important.
of the ways we live as if we don't have a father? And I think kind of a quick summary of what you just said is like there can be this like independence, unnecessary independence, and like fighting to live as an orphan when that is like also unnecessary.
Yes.
So I think that's one way that we live as if we don't have a father. And then the other thing that came to mind that you talked about on Sunday is just like fear. So Romans 8 talks about like we don't have the spirit of slavery that would lead us to fall back into fear, but we've been given the spirit of adoption by whom we cry, Abba, Father. And so there's just like Romans 8 is painting this like clear distinction, like you have the spirit of adoption, which makes you call out to your father. But when we fall back into the spirit of slavery, that leads us straight to fear.
Yeah.
And so I think fear is kind of like that, like red flag in your life of like, I'm not living like I have a father. Anytime I'm starting to like fret, worry, be anxious, like live in fear, start trying to like overanalyze every single thing, like that is like the dashboard being like, you're starting to live like you don't have a father.
Yeah, that's good.
And then another couple of examples is like when we're looking for security outside of our father, when we're trying to like have our inheritance now, and trying to like find our satisfaction in what we can gain in this life instead of in what the Father has for us in the life to come, and then looking for our identity somewhere outside of him.
Yeah.
And then in closing, let's talk a little bit about like sharing God as Father. So we talked about how because of being adopted into his family, now we share this Father with our brothers and sisters. And so what does that mean for our relationships with our brothers and sisters?
Well, it means that we should love one another. We should be supportive of one another. We should be cheering one another on. We are brothers and sisters. We are in the same family, and we are all going to spend eternity together.
Yes.
So,
yeah. And I feel like we cannot like overplay how much those horizontal relationships affect the vertical, and how much the vertical affects the horizontal. So like I think a lot of times it gets talked about that when we have distrust with a brother or sister, how that starts to cause distrust actually with us and God.
Yes.
And like, I don't think we realize the corporate damage and consequences that can come from long-term unresolved conflict and lack of reconciliation. And too, like when you don't have like good harmony and like communion and abiding with the Lord, like that's going to affect your horizontal friendships too. So I just think that like they both like really affect one another. And so we have to like be vigilant again about like making sure in all of our brother and sister relationships that we're like fighting for righteousness, which was that you kind of opened our eyes to how that is like relational wholeness.
Yes.
We're fighting for righteousness in our relationships with our brothers and sisters, and we're fighting for righteousness and like relational wholeness with the Father, because those are essential.
Yeah, we talked about that on Sunday, just how like the enemy of your soul, the enemy of God, knows that your relationships, that both of them, they work together, which is why the Apostle Paul said in Ephesians, Christ came to be our peace, to make peace with God and also with one another. And the enemy of your soul knows that if he can go after one, he can get to the other.
Yeah.
And I just think that we need to be on the lookout. We need to be on the wall about that. So we need to have a heightened sense of awareness that when we start to sense that there is relational tension, or there's like just relational chaos, there's misunderstanding, or there's tension in your heart, and you find yourself looking upon someone with contempt, and maybe it's like when you're with them and see them, or maybe it's just in your heart as you think about them, like that is a dashboard light that the enemy's trying to create some chaos in your life. And it's just really hard to have that kind of bitterness and contempt in our heart for a brother and sister, and then go like, hey, Father, how are you? Like, hey, can you help me with my daily bread today? I mean, and he's good and he transcends all those things, and he's gracious and forgiving. But gosh, the Apostle John, he said it, and I read it from 1 John 3 on Sunday, basically said, this is how you're going to know if you're a child of God, if you practice righteousness or not. And again, that's wholeness, whether that is in relation to God's commands or in relation to God and and relationally with his people. And he says, and if you love one another. So if you don't love your brother, you're not whole with God.
Yes. Yeah. And the Lord's Prayer is a communal prayer. Like, he's not saying, this is how you pray, my Father. He's saying, this is how you pray, our Father. So a lot of times whenever I'm feeling like relational funk or something like that, I try to just think like, can I, alongside this sister, alongside this brother, say with like a clean conscience, our Father, and like call on our Father. And just even that reality of like realizing we share a Father softens so much. So I just think it's a good practice to just think of your church family, think of those people who sometimes rub you the wrong way, or you may feel discord between, and pray for them, and then call on the Father that you and that person share. And that does a great deal in just softening your heart.
That's right. And I just want to tell a quick story. I'm pulling up my note because I'm looking for a quote that I just ran across the other day in my notes. So I'm looking for the quote. I know like dead air time is not good. Let me just tell the story. I may have told this before, but one night Katie and I had not been on the same page, which is a great way to say like we had been arguing, and I had probably frustrated her, perhaps hurt her feelings, and I don't even remember what it was, which is always the case, right?
Yeah,
like you never really remember the thing that it was about, but you do remember fighting about it. And we were just sort of laying there in bed, like in silence, and there's just like tension, right? And I was just laying there just thinking like, I'm not giving in here, like she's got work to do, right? And she's probably laying there thinking, I'm not giving in here. I am not rolling over. He's got work to do, right? And so it's like somebody's got to make the first move, right? And maybe if we had waited a little bit longer, she would have. But I just sensed in my spirit the Lord saying, you need to make the first move.
Yes.
Like that, John, you are the husband. Make the first move like Jesus did. And so I knew that, and I didn't know how to fix the fight, but I said, can we pray? And so let me say this, when you have relational tension with someone, whether your spouse or a brother or sister in Christ or somebody else, someone in your family, it doesn't mean you can't pray, right? But what I needed to do in that moment was pray about the thing, and just basically say it out loud with Katie. And it's really hard to stay mad at someone when you are praying with them.
Yes, yeah,
you know. And so that's just good for us to all remember, especially for those of us who are married, but also for those of us who have perhaps a friend who's disappointed us or hurt us.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to hold on to that when you go to the Father, your Father, their Father,
Yes.
right? And then, like, what are you going to do? You kind of have to, like, bring it before him, you know, and sort of lay it at his feet. And now you're not, like, holding on to it,
Yes.
you know, holding on to this offense.
Yeah.
Lord, I need you to do something with this because my heart is hurting and I've not done it great and they haven't, you know, I mean, just, I don't know, just praying about it is a powerful way when you're at an impasse and you don't know what else to do,
Yeah.
but you can't be satisfied with just a ceasefire or
Yes.
whatever when
Yeah.
there's stuff going on.
Yes, yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I think that just kind of rings true for what I've been sensing and like what I've been like trying to just like put my foot down about is like I want to go first. And so that you just said it, of like I want to go first when it comes to like initiating reconciliation. I want to go first when it comes to even just like pursuing someone and inviting them into my life. I want to go first when it comes to getting on the wall. I want to go first when it comes to like praying. Like I want to like let us just be a people who just decide today, like I'll go first. I'll do the thing that I'm like wanting and desiring. I'll be the first one to initiate that and pursue that. And I think the Lord blesses that.
Yes.
All right, any closing thoughts?
I couldn't find the quote.
I'm sorry. Maybe next week we'll throw it up.
Next time. Stay tuned.
All right, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll be back next week.
See ya.